Before anything else, do yourself a favor and prepare yourself for what's coming. Take a look and check if that subscribe button is already pressed, or if it is still sitting there, red and staring back at you. If it is, click it now, because the kind of thing we're about to share here, you won't find it on any news broadcast or in any movie. This is a story stitched together with care, told with the patience it deserves. Go ahead and leave a like right now while it's easy, because once the weight of this story settles in, it's easy to forget. And today, I want something extra from you. Drop a comment below telling me what city you're rewatching from and what time it is where you are right now. I love imagining this map of little lights scattered everywhere. A whole bunch of people listening to the same story from different corners of the world. Some of you on the bus heading home, others lying in bed with headphones on, some working through the dead of night. In the end, you'll realize that this information, your place and your time, might carry more weight than it seems. Now, take a deep breath, and come with me. This story begins in a building that most people prefer to remember by its affectionate nickname, rather than what it truly was. They called it the boys' house. Sounds sweet, doesn't it? When you drive past quickly, you see an iron gate, an unkempt garden, and an old building with tall windows. You can almost picture children running around, the shouts of play, a ball stuck in a tree. But behind that gentle name, the place had once been called what it really was, an orphanage. And before it became an orphanage, it had been something even heavier, something darker that people tried to forget. The person who gave me the first pieces of this story was a nurse. At least that's how he introduces himself in the notes he left behind. I never saw his face, never shook his hand, but I know the way he thought, the kind of guilt he carried around like a stone in his chest. I'll call him Alva. He didn't work there as an official employee of the orphanage. He was part of the health staff at a public hospital not far from there. Called in whenever one of the boys needed more serious medical attention. But here's the thing. Over time, Alvaro started showing up, even when he hadn't been called. He'd finish his shift, and instead of going home, he'd stop by the boys' house with the excuse of checking if everything was okay. If anyone needed help, in the pages he left behind, it starts simple enough. He talks about colds, scraped knees, a boy with a fever after getting caught in the rain. He mentions the elderly nuns, the director who always looked like he had another problem to solve. And he talks especially about the children who attached themselves to him most. There was a specific group that always appeared when his car pulled up to the gate. 3 boys and 1 girl. Always the same ones. They laughed. Anything, they asked questions about the hospital. Wanted to know what an operating room looked like. Whether stitches hurt, whether people passed out in a strange way when they were operated on. Alvaro answered patiently, invented metaphors, made jokes to lighten the weight of his words. At first, nothing unusual. An orphanage is a place full of children hungry for attention. An adult who actually listens becomes a magnet. The problem is when a pattern starts to appear where there shouldn't be one. Alvaro writes, for example, about a time he was called urgently because a boy had fallen down the stairs. When he arrived, he went straight to the makeshift infirmary. He treated the boy, cleaned and bandaged the wounds, talked with him. On his way out, the same 4 as always was standing in the hallway. One of them commented casually, "He's not going to stay with us." Alvaro asked what that meant. The girl answered, "We know when someone's going to stay." He treated it as children's games. The kind of phrase that sounds heavy, but is really just fantasy, just imagination. Until he realized that in his notes from the following weeks, every single time a boy or girl showed up injured and the group of 4 said they would unstay, that someone ended up transferred, adopted, or disappeared in a way that only entered the records as removed. When the group side, "They'll stay with us," it was the opposite. The child remained there, no matter what happened. This feeling that these 4 children knew more than they should. It started to gnaw at him. Have you ever felt that there are people who seem to see beyond what is right in front of them? Who understand things that shouldn't make sense to them, yet ... Alvaro describes an afternoon when he decided to ask where they had come from, what their story was. None of the 4 remembered their own last names. They only knew simple first names: Leo, Matthew, Jonas, and Anna. When he pressed further, wanting to know what city they were born in, who their parents were, the girl responded with a phrase he wrote down exactly like this, in quotation marks: We don't have a before, we only have an after. He laughed at the time, finding it beautiful, profound to Ben. But in his diary he writes, "This is not an answer from an 8 or 9-year-old child. This is something else entirely." Share in the comments an affirmation beginning with, "I recognize that, ... Double quotes, because sometimes admitting what we sense but have UN said out loud is the first step toward understanding the mysteries that surround us. When you put words to that recognition, you give it power, you give it reality, and you join others who are walking this same path of awareness." This is the thinking of an adult who has watched too many people leave, who has learned that goodbyes aren't always gentle. The visits became more frequent after that. Alvaro was no longer just the external nurse. He became a kind of permanent presence, even without a badge clipped to his chest. Sometimes he helped distribute medicine, sometimes he just talked with the boys, listened to their stories, and he started noticing something else, something that didn't quite fit. Those 4 never appeared in the cafeteria line, never showed up on the medication list, never appeared in the formal roll call. If he asked the staff about them, he received vague answers that slipped through his fingers like water. "Oh, they must be in the courtyard. They must be new. They must be with the teacher." Nobody looked him in the face and said, with certainty, "Yes, they're from here. They're in file number such and such." It was always deflection, always uncertainty, always another room to check. One curious day, he did what any organized hospital person does when they want to be certain about something. He went looking for paper, asked to see the intake records, the children's files. The sister responsible for the administrative side seemed uncomfortable, visibly bothered, but eventually handed over an old yellowed folder where each child's name came with an approximate arrival date, and sometimes minimal information about their origin. He went through page by page, searching for Leo, Matthew, Jonas, Anona. Nothing. Not a single matching name, not even a nickname. Even considering that many children there had repeated names, missing surnames, incomplete records, he found nothing that fit. When he closed the folder, he heard laughter behind the office door. It was them, the 4 of them, peeking through the crack, as if they knew exactly what he was doing, as if they'd been waiting for this moment. The girl Anna asked, "Did you find us?" He changed the subject, tried to brush it off. She finished her thought with words that stayed with him. "There is no point looking for us at the beginning. We only appear at the end." Sometime after that, Alvaro started experiencing a strange kind of exhaustion. He'd returned from the orphanage with the feeling of having done much more than he actually did, like he'd lived through hours that didn't exist on any clock. He remembered climbing stairs, walking corridors, entering a 3rd floor that, according to the building's blueprint, didn't even exist. He wrote about an old wing with smaller windows, where the walls had marks from beds that used to be pressed against them. But to any visitor, it just looked like a storage area, forgotten and unused. In his notes, the expression, "the room of those who stay," kept appearing again and again, without him being able to properly explain what he meant by it, what it represented. That's when he started hearing what the neighborhood residents were saying. The whispers that traveled from house to house. People who passed in front of the boy's house at night said they saw children in the windows, at hours when theoretically everyone should have been asleep. And these weren't just any children. They described faces that were too pale, fixed stares that never blinked, hands pressed against the glass without ever leaving a mark or a smudge. Some people swore that when they looked again, the window was empty and dark, as if no one had ever been there. Others said they heard children's laughter coming from the building even on stormy nights, when no one would let kids run around like that, when everything should have been silent and still. All of this would have just become another neighborhood legend, another story told to scare teenagers, if it weren't for what came next. The orphanage faced a sequence of problems that came crashing down like domino. Budget cuts, accusations of past mistreatment, a small fire in the kitchen that frightened everyone and made the authorities take notice. Word spread that the institution would be closed and the children relocated to other facilities. Alvaro, already emotionally involved with the place and the children, was devastated by the news. During that last week of operation, he decided to go there almost every day, as if it were a prolonged goodbye, as if he could somehow hold on to what was slipping away. On one of those final visits, he described something that changes the entire tone of the diary, that shifts everything into a different reality. He says he arrived at dusk with a heavy sky, That kind of light that makes everything look slightly greenish, otherworldly. The gate was open, but the courtyard was empty. There were no balls, no shouting, no signs of life. Inside the building, the silence was the silence of change, of endings. Boxers piled up, beds taken apart, cabinets left open. Some children sat in the hallway with a small suitcase on their laps, waiting for the car that would take them God knows where. Two futures they couldn't imagine. Others cried quietly, trying to be brave. The only ones who didn't seem shaken were Leo, Matthew, Jonas, and Dana. They stood at the end of the hallway, upright, backs against the wall. Calm as always, when he approached them, Dana smiled in a strange way and said, "It's our turn now." Alvaro, exhausted and emotional, interpreted this as if she were happy to be leaving. Perhaps because she'd been adopted, and asked where they were going. She answered with words that made no sense. "We're going back to the right place. You're the one who's going to change." What would it mean if in this moment you realized that the places you think you know have layers you've never seen? Realities hidden just beneath the surface, ... In the next part of the text, he describes a sudden dizziness that overtook him. He says he smelled ether, that same smell from the surgical preparation room, sharp and unmistakable. He heard the echo of a metal cart from far away, wheels squeaking on tile. For an instant, he had the impression that the orphanage corridor was stretching, and at the far end, instead of dormitory doors, there was an emergency door with a hospital sign glowing above it. The children's voices seemed to come from all sides at once, layered and echoing. He blinked hard, leaned against the wall for support, and doesn't remember anything else from that day. The memory just stops, cuts off completely. The next pages of the diary are confused, disturbing. The handwriting changes size, wavers as if he'd written with his hand shaking uncontrollably. He starts talking about visits to a place that mixes characteristics of the orphanage and a hospital, a hybrid space that shouldn't exist. He describes a pediatric wing where there are no parents sitting beside the beds, no visitors, no flowers or cards. He talks about beds that look like open drawers in a narrow corridor, arranged in ways that make no architectural sense. Children lying down, some in hospital gowns, others in the boys' house uniform, neither fully one place nor the other. In the middle of this scenario, someone walks around pushing a gurney, adjusting blankets, fixing pillows with practiced care. But someone is himself. Only with each page, Alvaro's awareness of the role he occupies there keeps changing, shifting like sand. At first, he thinks he's just on duty, assigned to care for a difficult group, doing his job. He complains about fatigue, about a shift that seems never to end, about a clock that doesn't match his sense of time. Then he starts noting the absence of obvious things, details that should be there. He doesn't see other nurses, doesn't receive orders from any doctor, doesn't hear the sound of an elevator, doesn't see daylight entering through the windows. It's always the same corridor, the same cold light, the same silence cut by children, as laughter and occasional whispers that seem to come from the walls themselves. And then comes the detail that connects everything, the piece that makes the puzzle complete. Among the children he tends to in this strange wing are Leo, Matthew, Jonas, and Dana. Only now they don't appear as the laughing group from the orphanage corridor. They're at different points in the place, scattered but somehow still connected. Leave in the comments your reflection beginning with "I commit to ... quotes. Because acknowledging what we're willing to face, what truths we're ready to accept, creates a bridge between the world we think we know and the deeper realities that wait just beyond our perception. Your commitment matters. Your willingness to see changes everything. Sometimes sitting on the edge of a gurney, sometimes standing near a door, sometimes way in the back near a window that looks out onto nowhere, onto a view that doesn't exist. And unlike the other small patients, they look directly into his eyes, as if they understand something he hasn't reached yet, something he's still approaching but can't quite grasp. In one passage, Alvaro writes something that makes your blood run cold. Today, while checking the floor of a girl who said she was waiting for her parents who died, I asked Leo how long I'd been here. He answered, "Since you fell in the hallway." I asked what hallway, which hospital he was talking about. He shook his head slowly, with something like pity in his eyes. "You keep confusing the places. We tried to warn you. First, you'd enter here leaving the boy's house. Now you arrive here without knowing where you came from. Realization doesn't drop immediately. Our minds protect us from truths too heavy to bear all at once. Alvaro tries to rationalize in the following lines. Tries to make sense of what makes no sense. He says he must be dreaming, that this shift is a nightmare, mixed with exhaustion, that some part of his brain decided to merge the environments that marked him most deeply, the hospital and the orphanage. Only the evidence keeps piling up against his own explanation, against the comfort of denial. He tells of how, during one of these shifts, he heard his own name being called from far away, like someone trying to wake him from a dream. The voice seemed to come from above, not from the corridor, not from anywhere in the space around him. It was asking him to wake up, begging him to open his eyes. At the same time, inside the scenario where he walked, none of the children reacted to the voice. It was as if that call was for another version of him, lying somewhere else entirely, in a place he couldn't quite remember. Further along, he mentions that he started paying attention to the clothes, to the details he'd been ignoring. The children always wore the same pieces, as if they were photographs, frozen images. He himself was always in the same lab coat, the same pen in his pocket, the same badge that he could never quite read. When he tried to focus on his own name, the badge would blur as if it were being censored, as if reality itself wouldn't let him see the truth written there. On one page, he writes in capital letters, as if shouting into the void, "I realized I don't arrive. Don't leave. Don't clock in. I simply am here." It is in this part that his narrative crosses with stories I heard from living people on the outside, from the world that continues without him. Patients in the regional hospital talking about how, on the eve of death, they always saw the same nurse passing in the corridor, straightening sheets, stroking children's heads with tenderness, checking IVs with practiced care. When they described this man, the portrait matched old photos of Alvaro in the hospital's catalog, images from when he was still breathing, still alive, unshaven beard, thinning hair, tired eyes that had seen too much, sad smile that knew more than it should. Some of these patients also said something curious, something that adds another layer to this mystery, that he would sometimes get distracted, would stand still in the middle of the corridor, staring at an empty wall, as if he were waiting for someone to walk out of it, to step through from somewhere else. One mother who spent weeks accompanying her son during his hospital stay, for example, told how she heard the boy say one night that the friends from the orphanage were calling him to come play in the old house. The boy had never been through any orphanage in his life, had never set foot in such a place. She asked where he got that idea from, where that came from. He responded with the strange wisdom of someone standing between two sides, someone who sees what others cowie in. The nurse who takes care of us used to live there with the children that know before. Now, he takes care of the ones who won't have an after. Haven't you wondered why certain people seem to appear at exactly the moment we need them most? Why some faces show up when we're standing at the edge of something we co-name? When I laid that sentence on top of Alvaro's diary, it made too much sense. Fit together like pieces that had been waiting to connect. The children who have known before were those from the orphanage he could never find in the files. The ones who existed but left no paper trail. The ones who won't have an after are the hospitalized children in critical condition, who see this nurse at the edge of their bed shortly before they leave, before they cross over. The place where he writes everything down, this wing that mixes hospital corridor with orphanage dormitory, seems to be precisely a transition zone, a threshold, neither common life nor acknowledged beyond, an intermediate floor of eternal shift, a waiting room between worlds, where time means nothing. The final revelation comes almost at the end of the notebook, when Alvaro's handwriting becomes firmer, more certain, as if by accepting the truth he had stopped fighting against it, stopped resisting what he already knew. He writes with clarity that feels like surrender. Today I understood, the children here aren't lost souls wandering aimlessly. They're guides. Since the boys' house, they've been showing me which sector I belong to, which realm is mine. I thought I was a visitor, then I thought it was just a long shift. Now I see that I died in that hallway that day when everything spun and I never realized it. I kept coming to work like I always did. They just changed the type of file I fill out. He describes his own death for the first time in an indirect way, approaching it sideways like you'd approach something too bright to look at directly. He talks about fainting, about a siren in the distance, about people running, about someone shouting words that echo through time. We lost him, but all of this comes as fragmented memory, like an old film playing on a broken machine, skipping and stuttering. Right after, he turns his focus back to the children, saying they're never in a hurry, that they appear near those who are about to leave. Not to frighten them, but to let them know that nobody goes alone, that someone is always there to guide the way across. Express in the comments a personal truth beginning with, I discovered that... double. Quotes, because in recognizing what we've been sensing all along, in giving voice to those quiet knowings that live in the spaces between heartbeats, we honor both the seen and unseen worlds that exist side by side, touching but never quite merging until the moment comes when they finally do. The appearances in the rooms of the nearly dead, he writes, with newfound certainty, are not warnings of disaster. They are confirmations of companionship. It's here that the story of the orphanage and the hospital, with spirits appearing near those standing at the edge of the end, locks itself into a perfect circle, complete and unbroken. The same group of children who in that old building seemed to choose who would stay and who would leave, now moves through the wings of different hospitals, crossing boundaries that shouldn't be crossed. There are reports from patients who the night before their death looked toward the corner of the room and asked the nurse if the girl in the blue dress could come closer, could step into the light. When the nurse said there was nobody there, that the corner was empty, he insisted, with the clarity of someone who sees what others can't. But she's holding the hand of that tired nurse, the one with the sad eyes. People in the IC, half sedated and floating between worlds, tell of a group of children who appeared near the bed, always accompanied by a man in a lab coat who speaks little, who mostly just watches with understanding. Sometimes these reports come from hospitals in different cities, in different states, as if this shift doesn't respect geographical boundaries, as if distance means nothing in that in-between place. The pattern is always the same, consistent across time and space. The appearances don't make noise, don't touch objects, don't knock anything over, don't whisper, ... They just remain there, present and watchful. Some patients become desperate at the sight, their hearts racing with fear. Others, curiously, describe a type of calm they hadn't felt in days, a peace that settles over them like a blanket. They say that after this group comes, they stop being afraid of not waking up, stop dreading the darkness that waits. On the side of the living, the shift team tries to fit this into comfortable explanations. Medication, hallucinations, fever, delirium, an exhausted mind playing tricks. But every now and then one of them, an older nurse, perhaps a technician accustomed to seeing everything, lowers their voice and admits that yes, they've seen the shadow of a child pass through the corridor at a time when there are no visitors allowed. Yes, they've seen a man in a lab coat walk through a door without opening it, without making a sound. Yes, they watched a patient look at someone invisible and smile in a different way, as if they were recognizing an old friend they'd been waiting for. And here's where you can choose how you're going to deal with all of this, how you're going to carry this knowledge forward. You can treat it as coincidence, as a well-told story, as metaphor designed to talk about death in a less cruel way. Or you can consider, even if just for 1 second, the possibility that there really is an intermediate floor, a silent sector where a nurse who didn't realize he died continues marking his presence, helping to guide orphanage children and ICU adults to the side that comes after, to whatever waits beyond the veil. Meanwhile, those 4 children, Leo, Matthew, Jonas, and Annette, keep appearing wherever the line between staying and going is thinnest, wherever that boundary becomes transparent. If you're listening to this story at home, maybe with the lights off, maybe wrapped in blankets, you can simply get chills and move on with your life. If you're listening to this in a hospital, on a shift, in the corridor, sitting in a companion's chair beside someone you love, maybe the wait is different for you. Maybe now you'll pay better attention to the corners of the room, to the half-open door, to the reflection in the frosted glass window that shows things it shouldn't show. If you work in a hospital ward, you will remember this story every time a patient near the end comments about children smiling at the foot of the bed, or about a nurse you know isn't on duty that night, isn't even scheduled to be in the building. One way or another, these stories of orphanages and hospitals intersect at a single point, converge at one truth: nobody wants to leave alone. Not those who have mothers and fathers waiting at home, not those who grew up in the boys' house without family, not those who spent their lives caring for others. thinking that in the end they would lie in a peaceful bed surrounded by loved ones who remembered them. Sometimes the one who comes to get you is precisely the one you cared for once, the child whose fever you broke, whose nightmare you soothed. Sometimes the one who comes is that group that has no before and no after, only an eternal during, an endless present where they hold your hand and lead you down the corridor you swore didn't exist, through doors you never noticed were there. And what if I told you that the people we care for in this life might be the very ones who return to care for us when our time comes? ... And you who listened this far, remember what I asked at the beginning. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment below, telling me where you're listening from and what time it is right now. It might seem like just another comment under a horror video, just words on a screen, but maybe, on some shift we can't see, in some corridor that exists between breaths, a tired nurse with a notebook in hand might be writing it down to listener identified. Still on this side, under observation. And if one day you wake up in a white bed and find yourself face to face with 4 children looking at you with curiosity, with recognition in their eyes, you'll know that this story wasn't just entertainment. It was a warning, a preparation for something inevitable. After you understand who those children are and what the nurse became, every hospital story starts to sound different, takes on new dimensions. Before, when someone said, "I saw people in the room beside my relative's bed," you could throw everything onto the account of strong medication, exhaustion, grief, approaching like a storm. After the story of Alvaro and the boy's house, every detail became a possible piece of a larger puzzle, as if there existed the same silent team operating in different places, following a kind of schedule that doesn't appear on any wall, that no administrator knows about. The first coincidences I ignored were the gentlest ones, easy to dismiss. A nursing technician commenting almost jokingly that in a certain wing, children in the most critical condition would stop crying suddenly and stare at the same point on the ceiling, transfixed by something no one else could see. A nurse reporting that before a death, almost always some companion would mention having seen a little kid in the corridor wearing out-of-season clothes, looking curiously through the doorway. Things you hear and forget within an hour. But after reading Alvaro's entire notebook, some stories started scraping inside me in a different way, leaving marks I couldn't ignore. One of them came from a hospital psychologist accustomed to dealing with delirium, hallucination, and the fear of dying. She had always entered ICU rooms knowing how to separate what is a brain in panic from what is reality, drawing clear lines between the two. Maybe that's why what happened to her weighed so heavily, shook her so deeply. She was called to talk with a teenage girl hospitalized with a serious illness, already tired of treatment, worn down by the battle. The girl had been refusing medication, saying it didn't matter anymore, that she already had visitors waiting for her, that they'd made arrangements. The psychologist patiently asked whose visit it was, expecting to hear the name of a dead relative, something predictable. The girl answered with startling clarity, "They're my friends from the orphanage. They came to talk to me last night, sat right here at the foot of the bed, and we talked for hours." The psychologist tried to pull at this thread, attempting to locate this in some childhood trauma, some forgotten memory. But the girl had never been through any orphanage in her life. She grew up with her parents, attended regular school, had a normal childhood by every measure. Even so, she described the boy's house in precise detail. TIN gate, the long corridor, the dormitory with iron beds lined up in rows, the tall window where the brightness of lightning would enter during storms. She also spoke of 4 specific children who led the group, who seemed to be in charge. One of the boys carried a dented tin car, dragging it everywhere. Another lived with his shoelace, always untied, always about to trip. The third had hair constantly falling in his eyes, obscuring his face. And the girl, in a simple dress, had a habit of pressing her forehead against the window glass, staring out at something no one else could see. When the psychologist asked for names, she spoke without hesitation, without needing to think. Leo, Matthew, Jonas, and Anna. The psychologist's blood went cold instantly, though the girl didn't notice the change, didn't see the color drain from her face. She herself didn't know why at first, until she remembered a piece of Alvaro's story I had told months earlier in a corridor conversation. Words shared between shifts. Back then, it was just a strange case, an interesting anomaly. Now those 4 children had crossed decades and kilometers, appearing to someone who wasn't part of their past, who had no connection to that old building. The psychologist tried to accompany the girl in the following weeks, staying close and watching carefully. She noticed a pattern emerging, undeniable and consistent. On days when the girl said she had seen the group, she became strangely tranquil, almost serene, even when pain racked her body. On days when she saw no one, fear returned with crushing force, overwhelming and dark. On one specific night, the psychologist decided to stay a little longer in the wing, sitting in a chair in the corridor with a chart on her lap, pretending to review papers, to have official business there. She wanted to see if she noticed anything between one medication round and another, wanted to witness whatever was happening. Late into the night, she heard the sound of toy wheels passing slowly across the floor, that distinctive hollow rolling. It wasn't a gurney, wasn't a medication cart, It was that dry sound of something light being dragged by a child at play. She looked in the direction of the sound and saw no one, nothing but empty hallway. But at that same moment, the monitor at the head of the teenager's bed registered a strange oscillation, numbers jumping unexpectedly. Her heart accelerated rapidly, then stabilized in a calmer rhythm, more peaceful than it had been in days. The girl opened her eyes, looked toward the corner of the room, and smiled as if she had recognized someone beloved, someone she'd been hoping to see. She murmured something the psychologist in the corridor couldn't understand, words too soft to carry. Minutes later, she went back to sleep, her breathing steady and calm. The next morning, she mentioned that her friends had come just to say it wasn't time yet, that she still had things to do here. Write in the comments an intention beginning with, "I decide, ... Double quotes. Because in declaring what we choose to accept what we're willing to believe, even when it challenges everything we thought we knew, we open ourselves to the deeper currents that run beneath the surface of this world, currents that carry us all eventually toward shores we cannot yet see, but that wait patiently for our arrival." The psychologist told us with shame in her voice, like someone who fears having crossed a professional boundary by believing in something that can't be proven, something that exists outside the realm of charts and diagnoses. But while she spoke, a detail escaped unintentionally, slipping out before she could catch it. She said that on that night, she had the clear sensation that she wasn't alone in the corridor, as if someone were standing behind her, looking over her shoulder at the chart notes, reading along with her. When she finally gathered the courage to turn around, there was nobody there, just empty space and fluorescent lights humming overhead. Even so, the smell that lingered in the air was of weak talcum powder, mixed with disinfectant. The aroma of a pediatric ward from other times, not from the modern hospital where they stood. It was a scent that shouldn't exist there, that belonged to a different era entirely. Another piece that fit together in an uncomfortable way came from an elderly hospital janitor, a woman who has seen more bodies being taken away than many people on the medical staff, who has witnessed more endings than beginnings. She says that in a certain wing she hates cleaning rooms after a patient's death, not for the obvious reason, not because of what happened there, but because the environment seems too occupied, too full of presence. She had never heard about the orphanage or Alvaro's diary, had no context for any of this, but she described with a precision that could be ignored the sensation of arriving in a room and being certain that there are still children inside playing, even though there's no children's bed anywhere, no toys, no signs of young life. She reported one specific episode that haunts her still. She was mopping the floor in one of these rooms, already empty, without a bed, waiting for renovation to begin. The windows were closed tight. Nobody was circulating in that section of the corridor. The whole area deserted. Suddenly, she saw reflected in the window the silhouette of a child messing with a gurney, small hands reaching up. She turned quickly, her heart in her throat, and there was nobody there, nothing but air and silence. When she looked back at the reflection, she no longer saw the child, but she noticed the figure of a man in a lab coat with his back turned, resting his hand on the gurney's rail. An automatic gesture of someone who has pushed that type of equipment their entire life, who knows its weight and balance without thinking. She blinked hard, trying to clear her vision, and the reflection vanished completely. The wet cloth slipped from her hand. She finished the work on autopilot, praying softly under her breath, words her grandmother taught her. She could have kept this just to herself, buried it deep where secrets live, if something hadn't happened a few days later. Something that connected the dots without anyone intending it to. An older patient, lucid and clear-minded, hospitalized in that same room after the renovation was complete. Told the doctor that the nurse who came at night didn't talk much, but would stand in the corner accompanied by very quiet children, just watching and waiting. The pragmatic doctor said that nobody brought children into the ICU, that visiting hours didn't allow such things, that regulations were strict. The patient insisted they weren't visiting children. They were children of the place. Children who belonged there somehow. The detail that made the janitor almost quit her job entirely was something else. The drawing the patient made with pencil and paper they'd given him for occupational therapy showed a lab coat with a rectangular badge hanging from it for small figures near this adult's legs, and in the background something that looked like an iron gate with tall bars, unmistakably the entrance to somewhere specific. Not everyone sees the hospital and the orphanage with this mixed clarity. Most people live and die without ever crossing paths with this sector. The problem is when your path crosses that in-between floor. A security guard, used to empty buildings, told me his story. He patrolled an old complex, once an orphanage, now mixed-use offices and medical rooms. One wing has been locked for decades. One night, he heard children running inside that sealed-off section. The door was still chained, the dust unbroken. Then, a new sound. Medical instruments clinking, like a surgical tray being prepared. A faint, cold light glowed from under the door. A retreated checked the cameras, and saw a man in a lab coat walking down a deactivated corridor, followed by 4 small shadows. When he replayed the tape for a colleague, the hallway was empty. From then on, whenever he passed that wing, his watch would lose a few minutes. It's easy to throw all of this onto the account of exhaustion, to blame overwork and stress and lack of sleep. What's difficult is ignoring it when, in separate reports from people who have never met each other, who live in different cities and work different shifts, the same elements appear with eerie consistency. A nurse with a tired face and sad eyes. Children of different ages standing together. A corridor narrower than it should be, more oppressive than any blueprint would show. An occupational therapist, for example, was once playing dominoes with a boy hospitalized in the ward. Endi, a long-term illness, one of those that stretches from childhood into adolescence, that becomes part of identity. In the middle of the game, he asked completely seriously if the orphanage playroom was going to open that day, if they'd be allowed to go there. She thought it must be a childhood memory surfacing. Asked when he had lived in an orphanage. Tried to trace the connection. He responded that he'd never lived in one, that he'd never even visited one, but that he always dreamed of the same place. Aubert and Aubert. A long room with old toys piled in a corner, a deflated ball that nobody had bothered to inflate, a bookshelf with very few books, and a large window that looked out onto a courtyard with sparse grass struggling to grow. In these room, sick children played while waiting for the tired nurse to call their name. To summon them. When he cayed, they would leave silently toward a corridor that seemed more like a hospital than a shelter, that had the sterile quality of medical spaces. She asked if anyone told stories in this dream, if there was comfort offered. The boy described without knowing it the timbre of Alvara's voice as several people remembered him. A low tone, somewhat hoarse, without hurry or rush. The type of voice that has delivered bad news so many times, it has lost its brightness, its optimism, but never lost the necessity of being kind, of maintaining gentleness in the face of darkness. The therapist swallowed hard, changed the subject quickly, but wrote everything down afterward in notes she keeps locked away. She herself had once felt the urge to nap in that room on an ordinary afternoon and had dreamed of an iron gate belonging to a building she'd never visited while awake, a place she somehow knew intimately. Heavy too considered how the places we dream about might be more real than the ones we walk through every day, might exist in dimensions our waking minds refuse to acknowledge. As these stories accumulate, pile up like evidence in an investigation, what's most frightening isn't the appearances themselves, but the silent organization behind them. The structure that emerges, it doesn't seem like chaos. Doesn't feel random or accidental. It's not a lost spirit bumping into furniture or a random shadow flickering. It's routine. It's shift routine. Systematic and organized. As if somewhere outside our floor plan, beyond our architectural understanding, there exists a schedule with names, entry dates, but no exit dates ever recorded. Orphanage on one side, hospital on the other, and in the middle a corridor where the same 4 children walk hand in hand, opening the path for the nurse who never realized his shift had changed, who never understood that the clock stopped for him while everyone else kept moving forward. Some people find this kind of story comforting, find peace in it. They think, at least you don't die alone. There's someone there accustomed to this moment, experienced with this transition, ready to accompany you across. Others find it terrifying for precisely that reason. The idea that in the moment when you most want to be with your own people, with those you love, a group might appear that has no connection whatsoever to your story, no place in your history, but who for some reason that completely escapes your control, that follows rules you'll never understand, has been assigned to come get you, to guide you away. And it's here that, without realizing it, we return to the beginning of everything. Back to the orphanage where this all started. Because if you look carefully, if you examine the patterns, you'll notice that most of these stronger reports have some connection with children, rejected children, abandoned ones, or with people who spent their entire lives caring for others without ever being truly seen themselves, without ever receiving the care they gave so freely. The boys' house building was partially demolished, renovated in other sections, transformed into headquarters for something that has nothing to do with childhood, that serves entirely different purposes now. Even so, on quieter nights, when the city sleeps, residents swear you can still hear coming from the land 2 layers of sound at the same time, overlapping and interweaving. Shouts of play and echoes of contained crying, of tears that were never allowed to fall freely. And mixed with all of this, the constant sound of gurneys being pushed across tile, of metal trays being set down, of pages being turned on a clipboard, of someone keeping records that matter. Maybe that's what most grips those who hear these stories. What keeps them awake at night, turning it over in their minds? The sensation that there exists a clandestine system functioning parallel to ours, operating with its own records, its own criteria for who stays and who goes. On official paper, we're born, we live, we die, we get a number, we get a medical report. Everything documented and filed. In Alvaro's notebook, and in the memory of those children, the records follow another type of logic entirely, one that doesn't care about birth certificates or death certificates, only about the moments when worlds touch and someone needs a hand to hold while crossing over. Tell us in the comments something that begins with "I transform ... double quotes. Because in naming what we're changing within ourselves, what understanding we're allowing to shift and grow, we participate in the greater transformation that connects all these stories, all these witnesses, all these moments when the veil grows thin enough to see through clearly. Those who were left without a before gain a different kind of after. Those who had plenty of after but no during worth remembering, no middle that mattered, might be accompanied by eyes that know what it means to be left behind, to be forgotten. And if there's something these orphanage children and the patients in their final hours have in common, it's exactly this shared experience of abandonment. Everyone, to some degree, was dropped somewhere along the way, left standing alone when they needed someone most. What haunts us in the end is unseeing a child at the edge of the bed or a nurse in the window-esque reflection. Those images we can explain away. What haunts us is the idea that all of this is method, that it's systematic and organized, that while we call it a haunting, someone on another floor calls it work, and work that doesn't end, doesn't go on strike, doesn't come with retirement benefits or vacation days. You can try to forget all of this after the story ends, can attempt to push it away into the corners of memory, turn off the screen, turn on the lights, change the subject to something safer, something mundane, ... But the brain has a habit of pulling things up at the worst possible moment, at times when we're most vulnerable. One day, sitting in a hospital waiting room, hearing the beep of monitors in the distance, that steady rhythm of machines keeping time, you might remember a lost phrase from Alvaro's diary, words he wrote in careful script. Here nobody arrives alone. There are only people who have yet understood where they came from and where they were going. You'll look to the side, notice the corner of the corridor, maybe see nothing or maybe see something small, quick, just outside your focus. A shadow at the height of a child or the discreet gleam of a badge without a name, reflecting light that comes from nowhere. And if this happens, no matter how much you try to convince yourself, it's just exhaustion. Just your tired mind playing tricks. A part of you will know the truth. There are shifts that don't belong to this hospital, don't appear on any schedule, and there are visits that don't pass through the front desk, don't sign in or announce themselves. What bothers people most about these stories isn't what appears head-on, what we can look at directly and try to rationalize. It's what stays only half visible, caught from the corner of your eye, insisting on returning again and again like a refrain you can't shake. The more cases I collected, the more interviews I conducted with people who had no reason to lie, the clearer it became that Alvaro and the children weren't trapped in just one place, weren't bound to a single location. It was as if the boy's house had become a kind of transfer station and the hospitals were branch lines, stops along a route that kept running long after the official service had ended. And in this coming and going, in this constant movement between worlds, too many people started hitting the same note without knowing they were talking about the same thing, without realizing they were all witnesses to the same phenomenon. There was the case of the paramedic, for instance, someone accustomed to seeing the worst scenario first, prepared for blood and screaming and pieces of metal piercing through car doors. He was the irritating type of skeptic, that guy who makes jokes during horror movies and says when he dies it's over. And that's it, nothing more. But he sought me out with a strange manner, like someone who isn't comfortable being on the side of those who talk about hauntings, who discuss things that can't be explained and yet has no other alternative, nowhere else to turn. He said if he told this to his colleagues, they'd demock him until the end of his life, would never let him live it down. He and his team were called to respond to a hit and run on a neighborhood avenue, arrived with sirens blaring. They got there fast, within minutes of the call. The body was still warm on the asphalt, heat radiating from skin and pavement. Middle-aged man, apparently with nobody nearby to call family, nobody who recognized him. While the firefighters isolated the area and the police did what they had to do, taking measurements and photographs, the paramedic stood there between rescue and futility, just observing because there was nothing left to save. In that moment, he saw across the street a child standing on the sidewalk, watching quietly with an intensity that made his skin prickle. There was something wrong about the posture, something off. It wasn't the curiosity of a kid watching sirens and flashing lights. It was a type of attention too concentrated, too focused, a level of understanding that didn't match with age or innocence. He crossed the street, thinking it might be the victim's child, someone who would need support and explanation. But when he got close to the sidewalk, there was nobody there, just empty concrete. He looked around, saw windows with curtains moving in the breeze, saw parked cars and closed doors, but no child anywhere. He went back to work, trying not to think about it, trying to stay focused on the task at hand. Later, on the way back to the base, the same impression returned stronger. Sitting in the ambulance seat with his back to the driver, he swore he saw, in the window's reflection, a couple of children seated in the back, like passengers, like they'd been picked up along the route. When he turned quickly to look, there was only emptiness. The team's backpacks, equipment boxers, the usual cargo. Even so, the reflection took a second longer to adjust, as if it insisted on the old image before accepting reality, before letting go of what it wanted to show him. He blamed it on exhaustion until he started noticing this only happened when the call ended at a certain hospital in the region. One specific facility. It didn't matter where the accident had been, what street or intersection. If the destination was that particular hospital, where the redirection from the old boy's house had become silent routine, the ambulance reflection would fill with company with small shapes that shouldn't be there. Sometimes he felt the weight of someone beside him, almost imperceptible, like a child had leaned there without wanting to bother anyone, just accompanying the journey to whatever waited at the end. One night, his body already numb from seeing so much tragedy, from bearing witness to so much pain, he couldn't take it anymore and spoke out loud. Quietly, "You're going with him, aren't you?" You're escorting him across. The driver, not understanding, not hearing clearly, asked, "What?" He brushed it off, changed the subject, but was certain he heard from the back of the ambulance a minimal laugh, muffled and soft, like children exchanging glances before running down the corridor again, before starting another game. Another story came from the morgue, a place that's already heavy by nature, already weighted with endings. The person who told me was an old employee, one of those who makes a point of treating each body with respect, with dignity, even when they arrive without documents or identification. According to him, strange marks kept appearing on sheets and gurneys, marks that shouldn't be there, like small footprints, bare feet crossing the wet floor, leaving traces. At first he thought it was carelessness from a resident, from a nurse, someone entering there with dirty shoes and leaving quickly, until one day he saw the marks appearing on the clean floor, from outside to inside, coming from the access corridor as he watched. They were too small to be from an adult, unmistakably child-sized. They looked like footprints of children emerging from shadow and heading toward the drawers, toward the places where bodies wait. He followed with his eyes, hands motionless. Sheets spread open on the examination table. The mark stopped near a specific drawer, one of those where they keep bodies still without identification. People who died alone with no one to claim them, no one to remember their names. And who would you be if you realized that the work of caring never truly ends? That the hands that comfort in life might still reach out from whatever comes after? Share in the comments your inner light with I Illuminate. Cause in declaring what brightness we carry, what understanding we bring to these dark corners where fear lives, we become part of the same network of care that Alvaro and those 4 children represent. The same endless shift of making sure nobody crosses alone. Nobody faces the final corridor without a hand to hold and a voice to say, "You safe now." You're guided. You're accompanied all the way home. On the tag attached to the metal drawer, a simple code without a name, just numbers that meant nothing to anyone who didn't work there. While he observed, trying to maintain professional distance, he felt a chill on his neck, that unmistakable sensation of someone standing right behind you, breathing your same air. He heard pressed close to his ear a whisper of a child-esque voice saying clearly, "This one comes with us, okay?" The words were gentle but absolute, without room for question. He spun his body around, ready to scold some prankster, some resident playing a sick joke, but there was nobody there at all. Just the corridor stretching empty, the steel cart pushed against the wall and the clock stopped on the wall, truly stopped with motionless. Hands frozen in time while the clock on his phone continued normally, seconds ticking forward like nothing was wrong. In the following days, he started noticing a detail he'd never paid attention to before. Something that had always been there but invisible until now. Some bodies, mainly children and adolescents, arrive with an improvised little bracelet on their arm made of gauze, tied carefully. These weren't the standard hospital bracelets with barcodes and patient information. It was as if someone had hastily marked those bodies in another way, using a different system of identification. On one of them, someone had scribbled with a pen that had faded over time a single word: stays. He told me this with eyes brimming with tears, which doesn't match someone who has worked there for so long, who has seen so much death that it should be routine by now. He said that of all the things he's witnessed in that cold room, the idea of children searching for bodies in the morgue is the only one that steals his sleep sometimes, that wakes him at 3 in the morning with his heart pounding. On another side of the city, far from that morgue, a nursing school professor used to take students to do supervised internships at hospitals, teaching them how to navigate the chaos and care. One night she herself was admitted after a sudden illness, nothing with a high chance of death, but serious enough to leave her in a bed with an IV in her arm and a monitor beeping steadily beside her. She, accustomed to being the professional, the one in control, found herself for the first time in the patient's place, vulnerable and afraid. That's when she understood in her skin what so many companions and old nurses talk about in whispered conversations, what they share when they think no one official is listening. On the second night of her stay, she woke with the sensation of presences in the room. Multiple somethings that shouldn't be there. It wasn't the team coming through to measure blood pressure or check vitals. It was different, carried a different energy. She felt the light weight of someone sitting on the edge of the bed near her feet. Gentle and careful, the mattress sank delicately, without abruptness or threat. The air gained that smell of children's clothes after a day of playing outside, mixed with cheap talcum powder, perfume, sweet and nostalgic. She, half groggy from medication and exhaustion, opened her eyes and saw 3 small blurred figures near the bed, standing close, and further back, near the door, a man in a lab coat observing everything with quiet attention. She couldn't see his face clearly, couldn't make out features, but the posture was familiar in a way she couldn't explain. Hands crossed in front, head slightly tilted, like someone evaluating a painting and waiting to see what happens next. Patient and eternal. She blinked hard, squeezed her eyes shut, and opened them again, and the scene vanished completely. The next day, she brushed it off, easily. Medication, side effects, bad sleep. Hospitals mess with your head in predictable ways. She tried to rationalize it into something safe and explainable, except that around the same time this had happened to her, her roommate. An elderly woman hospitalized because of severe pneumonia that wouldn't break. Mentioned having dreamed about children running through the corridor, leading a nurse by the hand, pulling him towards something. Too much coincidence. Too precise to ignore. From that day forward, the professor started listening with different ears. When students reported in their documentation that patients saw children in the room, but they spoke to invisible visitors, she stopped correcting them, stopped marking it down as a visual hallucination caused by fever or fear. She began noting it as a recurring report, as pattern worth investigating. There is also the story of a man who never passed through any hospital, and even so was marked by this intersection, by this crossing of worlds. He was a night doorman at a residential building, one of those who knows the residents' movements better than any security camera could capture. The building sat on a quiet street, peaceful and residential, but just a few blocks away operated a hospital. Ambulances passed by occasionally, cutting through the silence with sirens and urgency. He'd grown accustomed to this background sound, this occasional reminder of emergency. It became landscape, became white noise, until the night when something broke that pattern completely. While watching the street through the glass doors of the lobby, he saw outside in front of the building, stopped on the sidewalk, two children holding hands and standing perfectly still. They were without umbrellas, taking the drizzle that fell, and even so they didn't seem wet. Didn't seem affected by the rain at all. The yellowish light from the street lamp left their faces somewhat erased, shadows where features should be, but he could see that their eyes fixed firmly on the building's entrance, staring with purpose. It wasn't the look of lost children, wasn't confusion or fear. It was the look of those who wait for someone specific, who have an appointment to keep. The doorman opened the door, took a step outside to ask if they were okay, if they needed help or were looking for someone. When he crossed the threshold, when he stepped onto the sidewalk, they weren't there anymore, just gone. There hadn't been time for them to turn a corner, to get into a car, to run away. They simply vanished, like they'd never been solid to begin with. He went back inside, trying to convince his own brain that he'd been mistaken, that the rain and light had played tricks on his tired eyes. Sometime later, the elevator stopped on the ground floor and two paramedics stepped out, pushing an empty gurney, escorted by an elderly gentleman, devastated and broken. They had gone up to collect a resident who had passed away at home, died alone in her apartment. Sad scene, but common enough, part of city life. While they organized the exit, prepared to take the body away, one of the paramedics commented casually without thinking much of it. "Funny, I could have sworn I saw two kids down here just a little while ago, standing right where we came in." The other responded without giving it importance, without looking up from his work. "You walked too much through the pediatric wing today. You're seeing things. Your mind's playing tricks." The doorman swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. But that comment stayed lodged in him, stuck like something he couldn't digest. That Samoweek he overheard without meaning to two older residents commenting in the lobby about the past of the land, before the building was constructed, before concrete covered whatever had been there before. What would happen if in this moment you understood that the places we build over old sorrows never truly erase what came before? That history leaves marks deeper than any foundation. One of them mentioned that decades ago, before urban development transformed everything, there had been a children's shelter on that exact spot. A place where kids without families waited for futures that often never came. The other resident nodded knowingly and said she'd always felt the building had a strange energy in certain corners, especially near the elevator on rainy nights, especially when the light hit the lobby in particular ways that made shadows move differently. The doorman never told them what he'd seen that night, never mentioned the children on the sidewalk or the paramedic's casual comment that confirmed he was alone and witnessing something impossible. But from then on, he started paying attention to patterns he'd been ignoring. The nights when ambulances came for residents, the corner where children seemed to wait. The way time felt different in those moments, slower and thicker, like moving through something more substantial than air. All of these stories, scattered across different cities, different years, connected by invisible threads, keep circling back to the same truth that Alvaro discovered too late, that he only understood after he'd already crossed over himself. The work of caring doesn't end with death, doesn't stop when breathing stops or hearts go silent. It continues in corridors we can't map on shifts, that never appear on any schedule, with hands that reach across whatever separates this world from the next, to make sure nobody makes that journey alone, to ensure that even the forgotten, even those who died without names or families, have someone waiting to guide them home. Leave your declaration in the comments beginning with "I accept that." Because in acknowledging what we've been resisting, what truths we've been pushing away because they frighten us or challenge everything we thought we understood, we join the countless others who have stood at this same threshold between knowing and unknowing, between the world we can touch and the world that touches us back in ways we never fully explain but can no longer deny. There had once operated a children's shelter on that very ground, built with good intentions that couldn't overcome bad circumstances, and later it was demolished, erased from maps, but not from memory. The hospital nearby at the time received many of those little ones, transferred them when things got serious. It was too close for the ambulance to take long, just minutes between one building and the other. The combination of the two places formed an invisible corridor of coming and going, a pathway worn smooth by repeated journeys that never quite ended. Even after the buildings changed, the doorman could never again look at the street in the dead of night without imagining that beyond the cars, beyond the visible world of headlights and street lamps, there might always be someone small waiting for an ambulance to pass so they could follow it, could climb aboard unseen and ride toward whatever waited at the hospital, toward whatever crossing needed to be made. All of this could be seen as isolated stories, disconnected incidents that just happened to share similar themes, if it weren't for that sensation of continuity that runs through everything like a thread. The reports don't seem loose or random. They fit together like work shifts, like a schedule being followed with precision. One begins where another ends. Someone passes along the duties. The torch gets carried forward. Alvaro, in his diary, talked about something that at the time even he didn't understand, couldn't quite grasp. He saw occasionally other professionals in the corridor, one doctor here or there that he didn't recognize from anywhere, a nurse wearing a uniform from an old era with strange colors, an outdated style that nobody uses anymore, hurrying past to the other side without looking at him, without acknowledging his presence. According to him, they seemed busy with their own groups, too focused on their own charges. It wasn't just him working this shift, so there were other nuclei operating simultaneously, other routes being traveled, other stories being written in invisible ink. His was just one shift within a larger schedule, one small piece of something vast and organized that stretched across time and space in ways he could unmap. What makes all of this heavier to hear, harder to process, is realizing that in these stories of orphanages and hospitals, justice is crooked, bent in ways that don't match our ideas of fairness. It's not only good children who gain guides, not only dedicated nurses who become sole companions after death. There are reports of cruel children who tormented others in life, appearing in the rooms of bad people, making noise, laughing with malice still intact. There are reports of cold professionals who treated patients like numbers on charts, trapped in endless corridors, hearing names being called that they don't recognize, never arriving anywhere. As if the shift from up there or down below, from whatever realm handles these transitions, is also divided by affinity, by what each soul earned through how they lived. And that leaves a question nobody likes to ask out loud, the one that sits uncomfortable in the throat. What about those who listen to these stories? Do they stay only as spectators, safe on the other side of the glass? Or do they somehow enter the line to get added to some list being kept in a notebook nobody living can read? Because in various notes from different people, scattered across years and cities, appears a detail that shouldn't make sense, but repeats too much to be just coincidence, too specific to ignore. Patients in comas report, after waking, after being pulled back from wherever they went, that they heard someone speaking about a list of names, repeating in a low voice cities and some simple information, as if checking attendance, as if taking roll call. One of them obsessed with details even in near death. Swears he heard someone comment with a hoarse voice that sounded like it had spoken to many words over too many years. There are a lot of people listening to the stories and few people ready. It's going to be work. So much work ahead. Maybe it's just the mind collecting pieces, gluing together what was heard in life with what was glimpsed in the space between, mixing memory with hallucination in ways we can't untangle. Maybe that's all it is. Just neurons firing in patterns that create meaning where there is none. But even knowing this, even armed with rational explanations, There are those who can no longer walk through hospital corridors without paying attention to coroners to the height where a child's eyes would be two shadows that move when nothing solid possible. There are those who, upon seeing an old orphanage in a photograph, feel a knot in their stomach tighten, feel something ancient and knowing stir, as if the building itself knows more than it appears to, as if walls hold memories that photographs can't quite capture. There are those like you right now, listening to all these stories strung together one after another, who realize that what frightens us isn't seeing a ghost, isn't the appearance of something supernatural. What truly terrifies is noticing that behind each haunting exists routine, exists rules and schedules and hierarchy, exists organization that implies purpose and continuation. Because a haunted house, a lost spirit, wandering without direction, you can still imagine that one day it gets tired and fades away, that eventually peace comes and the haunting ends, but a well-organized shift. With a nurse who didn't realize he died and children who already understood they have no before and no after. Only an eternal present of work that needs doing, that doesn't rest, that doesn't close for holidays or renovations. It just continues forward. And it continues precisely there where the most fragile people pass through, in the rooms of those standing between one side and the other, in the corridors of those who were born without anyone to claim them, in the morgues of those who had no one to sign papers or arrange flowers, or remember their names when they In the end, the terror of this story isn't in screams echoing through empty halls, isn't in doors slamming by themselves or lights flickering at midnight. It's in the idea that while you try to sleep in peace, while you pull blankets tightened, convince yourself the world makes sense. There exists an entire world of people working in silence to guide along what we pretend not to see. What we've agreed collectively to ignore. Orphan souls calling to other orphan souls across distances that can't be measured in miles. A nurse without a body sweeping corridors that don't appear on any blueprint, that exist in dimensions our architects never learned to draw. And children who learn too young that love is conditional and care is temporary, now offering their hands to those who are about to learn the same lesson in the hardest way possible. In that final moment when everything you thought you knew proves insufficient and you need someone, anyone to say you're not alone, you're seen, you're guided. You matter enough that someone came back to make sure you do want to have to walk this path without company. This is the shift that never ends. The schedule that keeps running long after official hours are over. The work that continues because the need for it never stops. Because people keep dying, and children keep being abandoned, and someone has to be there in that space between. Someone has to hold the door open and light the way forward. Even if they're redoing it from the other side of a line we can't see, but that waits patiently for all of us eventually. So when you close your eyes tonight, when you turn off the lights, and try to forget what you've heard here, remember that somewhere in a hospital corridor lit by fluorescent lights that cast no shadows, in a room where time moves differently than it does in your bedroom, Alvaro is still making his rounds, still checking on his patients, still guided by 4 children who know the paths between worlds better than anyone living ever could, still doing the work that never truly ends, because caring doesn't stop, just because breathing does. For the doctor descending the street in an ambulance full of what the sensors register, without knowing there are more people inside than the equipment can detect, more passengers than any manifest would show. And the cruelest part is that if one day you cross paths with this shift, catch a glimpse of it in the reflection of glass in the corner of a bed at the edge of a lake in front of an old building, you might not even be frightened at first. You'll think you watched too many movies, that it's just a bad thought passing through, nothing more than imagination playing tricks. Only later, when the pieces start repeating in different places, when the same elements appear again and again across time and distance, will the realization finally drop. There are stories that don't end when we stop telling them. They just continue forward, change scenery, swap out the patient, but maintain the same faces, as always walking through the same corridors in silence, waiting for the next name to be called, for the next soul who needs guiding. The morgue is a place most people only imagine quickly, as if the mind itself refuses to assemble the entire scene, protects itself from the full weight of that reality. Refrigerator, drawer, white sheet, and nothing more. But for those who work there, the worst part is never the full drawer, never the occupied spaces. It's what happens when it's too empty, too silent, too much time left over to notice details that nobody should have to notice, that nobody wants to see. And it was exactly in these details that the stories became unbearable to ignore, impossible to explain away. The old employee I told you about, the one who saw small footprints on the wet floor, didn't have just one episode to share. He opened up gradually, like someone pulling up a sleeve to show a bruise they weren't even sure should be there. Uncertain whether the wound was real or imagined, he said that for a long time he tried to convince himself that this was the influence of what he heard in the hospital upstairs. Stories filtering down, people seeing children in rooms, strange nurses in corridors, this mixture of orphanage and pediatric wing that became almost internal folklore, urban legend among the staff, until the thing started not depending on anyone's report anymore, until it became undeniable. He describes a specific early morning shift when the morgue was relatively calm, almost peaceful. No new arrivals, no bodies to release to families, just the usual ones already prepared, waiting for paperwork to resolve the bureaucratic side, for stamps and signatures. He took advantage of the quiet to do what everyone does when movement decreases and time stretches. Organize drawers, check tags, see if everything is where it should be, maintain order in a place dedicated to the end of order. It's at this time that the world weighs most heavily, when you're alone with the evidence of endings. Name, number, age, cause of death, everything reduced to a line of pen on a piece of plastic tied to an ankle. Identity shrunk to its smallest possible form. He went drawer by drawer, reading cards, checking for any discrepancy, any mistake that needed correcting, until he reached one that always bothered him more than the others. It carried extra weight he couldn't shake. The drawer of, to be clarified, people who arrived without documents, without family, without anyone to call, or in such bad condition that giving a name was impossible. Identity erased by circumstance or tragedy. In T's drawer, the tag comes with a cold word, a damned word that strips away the last shred of personhood. Unknown. He opened it slowly, expecting to find the same body he had prepared hours before, meticulously cleaned and covered, and saw the sheet folded neatly, perfectly, ... Empty. Space, where weight should be, where a person should still be waiting. The first impulse was rational, reached for the safest explanation. He closed the drawer, checked the registration book with careful attention. The last entry clearly said that the unknown from drawer 23 was still there awaiting release from the medical examiner, still in bureaucratic limbo. There was no signature for removal, no exit time noted, nothing to suggest anyone had come for this person. Went back, opened it again. Empty. And it wasn't the empty of there was never anything here. Wasn't the pristine empty of unused space. The sheet held the impression of recent weight, like a bed just vacated, like someone had been lying there moments before and then simply ... left, while he stared at that space that should be occupied, that couldn't possibly be empty. He heard coming from the far end of the corridor the sound of gurney wheels rolling steadily forward. Only the morgue at that hour had nobody in it besides him, nobody living anyway. The sound approached closer, that dragging of metal on tile, accompanied by a distant tinkling like a tray vibrating as the cart moved, instruments rattling against each other. He didn't see any gurneys or nothing solid moving through space, but he felt the air get colder in a narrow band at waist height, as if something had passed right beside him, brushing close enough to disturb the temperature. That's when he noticed something he'd ignored until that moment, something his mind had been avoiding. The old wall clock with hands marking time showed exactly the same minute it had shown when he started organizing the drawers. Hands frozen in place. The cell phone in his pocket displayed almost 40 minutes more, nearly an hour of difference. Time had moved forward for him, for the body, for the rest of the hospital upstairs continuing its rhythms. Only for the morgue clock had it stopped, had it refused to advance. He told this with his voice low, looking at the floor as if confession required humility, and added a detail that isolated might seem. Theatrical might be dismissed as embellishment, but together with everything else, becomes a piece of evidence impossible to ignore. That day, arriving home exhausted, he accidentally opened the pocket of his lab coat before throwing it in the washing machine and found a folded paper, small and deliberately hidden with handwriting that wasn't his, that he'd never seen before. It was a fragment of a tag, probably torn from some body at some point during the shift, with a single word written in black pen. Stark and final. Transferred. It didn't say where to, didn't say by whom, didn't note any time or destination, just the word left there like a process stamp, like bureaucratic confirmation of something that happened in a realm where paperwork means something different. The drawer physically continued holding nothing but air. The book kept saying the body was still there, officially present and accounted for. But somewhere, in some office that exists in dimensions our forms don't reach, someone had already decided that he had been transferred, moved along to wherever comes next. After that shift, after that night that changed how he saw his work, he started paying doubled attention to the unknowns, to those who arrived without names. Almost always, they were victims of accidents. People found on roads, under viaducts, at the edge of woods, where nobody looks. People who, if they were children, could very well have ended up in the boy's house one day. Another lost soul added to the roster, and if they were adults, could have crossed half their life without anyone knowing exactly where they wandered, what path they followed. He began noticing that in most cases where the drawer seemed to hold too much air, where emptiness felt heavier than it should, other signs happened around it like sympathetic magic. Light bulbs flickering only in that corridor, as if dividing energy with some invisible place running parallel. Sound of small steps on the waxed floor, careful footfalls that suggested purpose. Clear sensation of getting in the way of someone who had been working that shift long before him, who had seniority in realms he couldn't access. It wasn't only in that morgue that things like this started appearing, started becoming undeniable. In another city far from there, separated by highways and years, a medical examiner, accustomed to crime scenes, accidents, ugly scenarios, went through something that shook the cold security with which he'd always described bodies. The professional distance he maintained. He was alone in the autopsy room, finishing the report on a hit-and-run victim, documenting the evidence methodically. The victim, a young man without documents or identification, had strong impact marks, violent trauma, but his face was still intact enough to be recognized later by someone who might come looking, might claim him. He dictated mechanically to the recorder, his voice flat and clinical. Male sex, approximate age, color, height, injuries, all those terms that turn any person into a descriptive object, that reduce life to measurements and observations. At a certain moment, he needed to check the estimated time of death, cross-referencing with the paramedics' report for accuracy. He pulled the sheet closer, read what was written in the standardized forms. Probable death at the scene. Response time X. Arrival at hospital at such hour. Forwarded to morgue. The number was smudged badly, as if someone had run their finger over the ink while still wet, deliberately obscured it. He frowned, brought the paper closer to his face, tried to guess the number without success, set the sheet aside. Frustrated, looked at the digital clock on the wall to at least note the current time for his records and froze completely. Couldn't move or breathe. The display showed an impossible time, an hour previous to the moment when the ambulance had even been called, before the accident had occurred. He found it strange, thought there might have been a power outage that reset the clock to factory settings. He walked to the wall to adjust it, to fix what must be a malfunction. But before touching it, he heard footsteps echoing in the corridor outside. Clear and purposeful. They weren't heavy adult footsteps in dress shoes or work boots. It was light and regular trampling, like children running in a group, playing chase or tag. The sound passed in front of the door, continued down the corridor ahead, and disappeared around a corner that led nowhere, that dead-ended at a wall. The medical examiner, alone with a tray of instruments in front of him, stood frozen, his hands stretched toward the clock without courage to move, to break whatever spell had settled over the room. Moments later, the recorder he'd forgotten was still running, still capturing everything. Picked up a sound different from his own voice, dictating clinical observations. A multiple whisper, low and layered, of various children's voices overlapping and interweaving, saying something that, when heard again later, when played back in the safety of daylight, seemed like a single word stretched out, elongated, arrived. He's not a man who impresses Ayali, not someone who scares at shadows or jumps at noises. Share your experience in the comments, beginning with, I sense that, ... Because in articulating what we feel but haven't dared to name what our bodies know before our minds accept, we build bridges between the rationale, world we cling to, and the deeper truths that exist, whether we acknowledge them or not, whether we have courage to face them or choose to look away. Even so, at the moment when he heard the recording played back, felt his neck tingle with that electric sensation of being watched. He stopped the audio abruptly, deleted that section, pretended it never existed, erased what couldn't be explained. But that same week, he received from the hospital a supplementary report with the time of death already filled in, written in handwriting that wasn't anyone from his team, that nobody recognized. And the time noted matched exactly with the impossible hour that the clock had marked on the wall. The time that couldn't have been right, but somehow was. In another smaller hospital, the morgue was located in a cramped basement, the type of place that's born with a bad reputation that people avoid even mentioning. Access was by a service elevator that from time to time descended by itself without anyone having pressed the button, moving like it had its own will. That alone was already unsettling, already enough to make people nervous. But what put fear even into hardened staff, people who thought they'd seen everything, was something else entirely. The elevator panel, from time to time, marked a floor that didn't exist between the ground level and the basement, an extra number appearing without any corresponding button to press, without any architectural explanation. When this happened, it was always at the time when somebody was being transported or arriving from another location, always during transitions. One of the staff members, somewhat joking around, decided one day to comment, "That extra floor there must be for the orphanage people." He said this without knowing anything about the stories, spoke because since childhood he'd heard his grandmother say that before becoming a hospital, that land had been a large house that sheltered children who had nowhere else to go. They laughed at the time, made jokes, pressed the button for every floor like someone messing with superstition, tempting fate. The elevator didn't react, didn't acknowledge the game. But that night, the same staff member, descending alone with sheets in his arms, swore he saw in the internal mirror for small figures behind him, standing still and quiet, looking at the panel with focused attention. When he turned his face to look directly, there was nobody there, just the sheets, the cart, the sound of steel cable moving through the shaft. The reflection took a second longer to adjust to reality, to catch up. Time enough for him to see, before it vanished completely, the outline of a lab coat behind the children, a taller figure watching over them. There's also the routine of those who work in body release, that sector where family arrives to recognize people. 2 sign papers to decide on caskets, and make arrangements nobody wants to make. There, the haunting is quieter, more psychological, but no less concrete for those who spend too much time in that room, who witness too many goodbyes. An assistant told me that on certain days, especially in cases of child deaths, the room would have a different air, heavier and more oppressive. It wasn't because of the families crying, which was already expected, already part of the job. It was because of a presence she couldn't define, couldn't name, but could feel pressing against her skin. She said that in one specific release, she called the mother of a boy who had died after a long hospitalization. After fighting as hard as he could, the woman entered in pieces, supported by a relative, was guided to the recognition room with careful hands. When the sheet was lifted, she could only bear to look for 1 second, just enough to confirm what she already knew in her bones, what couldn't be denied anymore. On the way out, the mother, stumbling and broken, commented something the assistant never forgot. Words that echoed 4 years afterward. "I know he didn't go in there alone. I saw the other children waiting for him in the corridor last night, standing together like they had an appointment." The assistant, accustomed to hearing delirium from pain, from grief that breaks the mind, swallowed hard and tried to calm her, tried to offer rational comfort. But when she was alone with the file in hand, she noticed a detail that made her blood run cold. In the observations section of the medical record, someone had noted at a time shortly before death, reports presence of friends in room, pediatric patients already discharged. Problem was, there hadn't been any other children hospitalized on that floor at that moment. Not a single one besides him. He'd been alone according to every official record. In the morgue, the team commented later that when the boy's body was placed in the drawer, they heard a different sound than usual, as if something light had jumped inside together with him tapping gently against the metal, a weight that shouldn't be there. Nobody had the courage to check, to open the drawer and verify. In the morning, upon opening it again for processing, the worker said he found a small plastic toy on top of the sheet, simple and worn. A little car, cracked and faded, that hadn't been there when they brought the body down, that appeared from nowhere. He threw the toy in the trash, by reflex, by instinct. Minutes later, he had to go to the bathroom to vomit, not so much because of the object itself, but because he remembered unwillingly the description he'd once heard from someone about that group of children who appear in hospitals. One of them, they said, never let go of a dented tin car, carried it everywhere like a talisman. And it's not only recent bodies that seem to call attention, but seem to attract this presence. In certain old morgues with ossuaries, with boxers of mortal remains from decades past, employees report something else entirely. Drawers that give echo, that respond when they shouldn't. There was an assistant who, playing the clown to disguise fear, to make the darkness less heavy, kept tapping lightly with his hand on drawer fronts, listening to the vibration, the hollow sound. Mose returned a muffled sound, dull and expected. One of them, however, returned something that wasn't an echo but a response, as if someone had knocked back. 3 dry knocks from the inside. Deliberate and measured, the young man froze completely, pressed his ear against the cold metal plate, and at the limit between hearing and imagining, swore he perceived a whisper that at one moment seemed like crying, at another seemed like laughter, shifting between the two. On the general tag of that drawer there was no name, just an old number, scribbled and faded, with records that had been lost to time or carelessness. When he went to comment with the oldest member of the team, the man merely shook his head tired and said with the weariness of someone who knows too much, "There are dead people who do UNT accept having been forgotten, especially those who arrived here with nobody to knock on the glass to ask questions, to complain about their treatment. If you were you, I'd stop provoking them, stop playing games." The kid stopped his tapping, but began noticing after that day that every time they passed by there with a new body of a child or young person, the air near that drawer got colder, as if something inside paid attention, took note of new arrivals. There's still the question of the photographs, another layer of evidence. Many old morgues keep by protocol photographic records of certain cases. Cardboard boxers full of pale images, erased faces, injuries, marks, things that should stay archived and forgotten, locked away. But from time to time someone needs to dig through them. An investigator, an audit, a curious student. And then too many coincidences emerge, patterns that can't be explained. A nurse doing an internship in forensic medicine told how in a college assignment she had to organize these photos by date, catalog them systematically. In some of Tim, however, she noticed something that wasn't part of the focus, wasn't what she was supposed to be looking at. While the professors told her to look at body position, at characteristics of injuries, at the official details, she noticed in the background there appeared repeatedly a piece of corridor, always the same one, showing up in the background of some records, and in 2 of them, a half-focused figure at the height of a child, between the door frame and a cart, standing and watching. It wasn't an exposure error, it wasn't a light stain or film defect. It was outline, it was shape, suggesting presence. In another series taken years later, in a remodeled morgue, she noticed in a corner the shadow of someone in a lab coat, always in the same spot, as if accompanying the photographer, but never fully entering the frame. Never quite solid enough to be undeniable. When she told me this, I immediately thought of Alvaro S. old diary and the description he gave of standing and observing those who arrive even when he had nothing specific to do when his shift should have been over. He said that caring for the dead is different from caring for the living, that one weight leaves and another enters, that the work transforms you, and that sometimes his job seemed to be just ensuring that nobody was completely alone at the time of being tagged, or being reduced to a number. The line that connects morgue, orphanage, and hospital in the end is this silent obsession with registration. Paper, tags, names, everything that gives the illusion of control over something completely uncontrollable. Something that slips through our fingers no matter how tight we grip. But in the gaps of this organization, the smudged tag, the empty drawer, the photo with one shadow too many, the footprint on the clean floor, it's there that these other presences reveal themselves. Step forward into visibility. Alvaro, from the other side, fills out his clipboard with careful notation. The police station staff fills out reports. The morgue fills out the drawer log. The cemetery fills out the grid of tombstones. But underneath all of this, there seems to be another type of list being maintained in a place where clocks stop and children's footsteps echo forever, where time means something different than it does for us. The most disturbing thing is realizing that within this invisible system, the morgue isn't the end, isn't the final destination. It's just another passage room, like an orphanage dormitory or hospital room. Another stop on a longer journey. There is the moment when the body stops completely, when breathing ceases and hearts go silent, but something is still being decided. still being processed. Sties or gois forwarded or disappeared, claimed or forgotten, and in stories that repeat too much to be swept under the rug. In that hour of indecision when paperwork waits for signatures, it's there that the children appear most frequently, standing in doorways, leaning against walls, observing as if checking to make sure nobody who should come with them is being forgotten in some drawer, left behind when they shouldn't be. Those who work in morgues for many years end up developing a habit, a practice that seems strange to outsiders. They talk to themselves, have conversations with empty air. Sometimes it seems like it's with the body, asking permission to turn it, to move it, to cut into it with respect. Sometimes, without realizing it, it seems like it's with someone standing on the other side of the gurney, someone who doesn't appear in the reports, who isn't officially present. There was one of these employees, already close to retirement, who confessed to me that in recent years he started saying goodnight out loud before turning off the light and closing the door. Ending his shift, one day, on impulse, he completed the phrase differently. Good night to you all, who stay after my shift ends. Who work when I go home? Nobody responded, of course. No voice came back, but in that instant he had the distinct sensation that he wasn't in fact saying goodbye alone, that someone heard him and appreciated the acknowledgement. And it's there that the terror truly settles in, becomes impossible to shake. It's not seeing a body, not knowing that death exists and waits for everyone. On some level, everyone already knows this and tries not to think about it too much. What weighs heaviest imagining that in the hour when everything ends for us here, when our part is done, there are people in lab coats and orphanage children working in silence to ensure nothing remains without a file, without company, without proper forwarding to wherever comes next. The morgue, in this logic, isn't just cold storage, isn't just a place to keep bodies until someone claims them. It's an attendance desk for a shift that never closes, never goes off duty, never takes holidays or sick days. And if you look too long at the wrong drawer, you might end up feeling the same thing that employee felt on that early morning. That, on the other side of the metal, someone also pressed their ear against it to see if you're still there, to check if you're paying attention. Over time, listening to morgue employees, medical examiners, janitors, security guards, I started noticing that all these stories push toward one place, the basement, the lowest level. It didn't matter if the building had 10 floors above. Modern wings, ICUs full of light and life. Down below, in the cold, there always seemed to be something operating on its own. Following rules, we don't write. And at some point I understood that I couldn't just keep listening anymore. Couldn't stay safe in my observer role. I needed to descend, not to play brave or prove anything, but to see how far the shift down below mixed orphanage, hospital, and this intermediate sector that seemed to use living people like pens, like instruments for recording. That's how I came to seek out the old employee again. The same one with the small footprints and the empty drawer, the one who'd seen too much. He agreed to receive me again, but this time he didn't speak in the cafeteria or the parking lot. Didn't want the safety of public spaces. He said, if you want to understand, come during the shift change, when there's no body going up or coming down. That's the hour when the morgue breathes deeply, when you can feel what's really there. The expression he used bothered me immediately, sent warnings through my nervous system. Even so, I went. I had to know. The path down there is always similar, no matter which hospital you're in. Corridor that gets quieter with each step. Service elevator that nobody likes using. Smell of cleaning product mixed with mold and dampness. When the door opened, the air was different from the day I'd gone just as a curious visitor, when I thought this was just interesting stories. It seemed denser, as if there was too much humidity in a place that theoretically should be dry. The employee waited for me, leaning against the counter, with the face of someone who regretted having called me, but wasn't gonna back out now, who'd committed to showing me truth. Look around calmly, carefully, but don't touch any drawer without me asking you to, he warned, with quiet intensity. I noticed details that the other time I'd walked right past, that I'd been blind to. The wall clock was still there, with hands moving slowly but with a regular tick, except sometimes it seemed to choke on a second and need extra force to escape, to continue forward. On the other side, near to door, a thick notebook with a dark cover rested on the counter, separated from the official registration book. That caught my attention immediately. pulled my focus. It was exactly the size of Alvaro's diary that I had read, that had started all of this. I asked what it was, tried to keep my voice steady. The employee hesitated, then pushed the notebook in my direction, like someone handing over something that's been weighing too much in their own hand, but they're relieved to share. This here isn't the Morgue's book. It's the book of the others' shift. I just keep it safe, maintain it for them. I opened it with hands that wanted to shake. It wasn't a body log. Didn't have cause of death. Didn't have weight measurements. Didn't have exact time in round numerals, the way official records do. They were short notes, almost messages, written in different handwriting, as if more than one hand had passed through there over the years, as if multiple people had contributed to this unofficial record. On the first page, something that looked like a title, but crossed out so many times that you could only read pieces. Cases under observation, forwarded, reports. The following lines listed things that gave me that sensation of internal falling, of ground disappearing beneath my feet. Female companion reports seeing child at pediatric ICU door. Such city. Paramedic comments on children's laughter in ambulance without passengers. Morgue. Employee hears knocking in drawer of unknown person. It wasn't a list of the dead. It was a list of who was messing too much with the line, who was seeing too much, who was getting too close to understanding. The more I turned the pages, the more familiar the pattern became, the more undeniable. They were descriptions of living people with small notes beside them. Still on this side, frightened, doesn't believe, beginning to understand. Scattered in the middle, some words that froze me more than any drawer ever could. Orphanage. Boys, tired nurse. There are things you only understand in the second you see them written, when they become undeniable. Suddenly I realized that this notebook wasn't an inventory of phenomena. It wasn't just it was a kind of damage control. As if from the other side someone was tracking who was pulling too hard on the curtainous thread, who was asking too many questions. I continued reading, feeling my hands sweat underneath the paper, moisture making the pages stick slightly. On one of the more recent pages, the handwriting changed completely. Tell us in the comments something that begins with I transform ... double quotes. Because in naming what shifts within us, as we encounter these truths, as we allow ourselves to see what we've been taught to ignore, we participate in the greater work of witnessing, of bearing testimony to realities that exist, whether we acknowledge them or not. Two shifts that continue their eternal rounds, whether we be brave enough to watch or choose to look away. It stopped being the shaky handwriting of an employee, someone nervous and uncertain. It became something firmer, more direct, like technical notation, written with purpose and clarity. Beside a report, I recognized immediately the story of the psychologist hearing the toy cart in the corridor while the patient stabilized. Someone had written a short line in that same confident hand. Shift present, filtered down in response to another report. The one about the medical examiner and the recorder that captured voices it shouldn't have. Another phrase appeared. Contact confirmed. What killed me completely, what made my blood go cold, was the last page I turned, half stuck together as if they didn't want me to reach it. As if this was information I wasn't supposed to see. Apatit, up in larger letters. Someone had noted parallel sector, oral record. And below that, some abbreviated names. Nicknames of people who somehow started collecting all these stories and transforming them into narrative, into something that could be shared. And in the middle of them, too recognizable to be coincidence, too specific to be random, was a nickname that only truck drivers used to talk about me at the rest stops where I passed her, asking for reports, collecting tailies. It wasn't my document name. It wasn't what appears on official papers. It was the nickname that slipped onto the CB radio, then into comments, then into conversations at diners and gas stations. They saw me as the guy with the road and hospital stories, the one who listened when others needed to talk. There in that notebook, that theoretically shouldn't exist, that had no official purpose. Someone had written that nickname and beside it a simple observation in that same firm handwriting, the one that suggested authority and long practice, responsible for compilation, useful, still on the outside, kept under constant observation. I stood there staring at those words, trying to fit them into my head in some less paranoid way, trying to find rational explanations. It could be a joke from the employee, could be a prank from someone who discovered who I was and decided to mess with me, to play a cruel game. It could be, and I desperately wanted it to be just that. Wanted this safe explanation. But before I could formulate any accusation, before I could voice my doubts, something happened at the back of the room that made all rational theories lose strength in the same instant. 3 drawers slammed from nowhere, one after another in quick succession, as if someone had pulled and pushed them with force from inside out, deliberate and angry. It wasn't the crack of metal expanding from temperature change, wasn't wind somehow getting in, wasn't any natural settling. It was the sound of deliberate knocking, of communication. The employee jumped in place, cursed loudly but without surprise, without shock in his voice. "They don't like when you mess with the page of those who are working," he murmured, and the choice of word pierced through me like a blade. Working. Not living. Not going crazy. Not haunting ... working. As if this was their job, their purpose, their eternal assignment. He took the notebook from my hands in one swift motion, closed it decisively, dropped it back on the counter and breathed deeply, like someone trying to regain control of their own space. To reassert authority in a place where authority means less than we'd like. The wall clock that I'd barely noticed in the last few minutes was stopped again, frozen in time. The second hand trembled at one point without courage to continue forward. Vibrating but unable to move, I pulled my phone from my pocket with shaking hands. The screen showed that much more time had passed than I thought I'd been down there. Hours compressed or expanded in ways that made no sense. Up above, the world moved forward normally. Down here, the tick-tock was playing dead, refusing to acknowledge time's passage. The employee noticed my look at the clock and laughed without humor, without joy. That's why I leave as soon as I can. Why I don't stay longer than my shift requires. Sometimes it feels like they're passing the shift over, transferring duties, but forgot to tell those of us who are alive, who still have bodies that need rest. I didn't argue, didn't ask for clarification. I asked to leave, to get out of that basement that felt like it existed in multiple realities at once. He accompanied me to the elevator, pressed the button without looking properly at the panel, avoiding eye contact with the numbers. On the way down, everything had been normal. Cold light, boring walls that mirror nobody wants to stare at too long. On the way up, when the door closed and I was alone in that metal box, a reflection that wasn't mine appeared for 1 second in the corner, flickering into existence. It wasn't a complete face, wasn't fully formed. It was a cutout, a fragment, half of a lab coat, a clipboard held in invisible hands, a piece of pocket with a pen, and at leg height, small blurs like children standing beside someone taller, more out of focus than anything else. Present, but not quite solid. I blinked hard, forced my eyes to clear, and the reflection returned to being just me, too pale and shaken. I didn't tell this to the employee when the door opened onto the ground floor, and I stepped out into fluorescent normality. I went up to ground level, pretending it was just lack of air from the basement, just the staleness of underground spaces. That night at home, I sat down to organize my notes, to make sense of what I'd witnessed. When I went to look for the audio of the conversation with the morgue employee, to transcribe what had been said, I noticed a noise in the background of the recording, in a stretch where nobody was talking, where there should have been only silence. I increased the volume, put in headphones, listened, concentrated with every sense focused. It was a light sound, metallic, of pen scratching paper with deliberate strokes, accompanied by something that sounded like a page being turned, like someone working through a document. And obeyed that, very quietly, as if it had been captured by accident. A phrase said in a neutral tone, professional and clinical, without drama or emotion. Another one listening, register it. It wasn't the employee's voice. It wasn't mine. It was a hoarse voice, tired but calm, measured and patient. Exactly the way people describe that nurse, that figure who appears in so many of these stories. Right there, I understood in a way that hurts, that cuts deep into certainty. While I thought I was gathering reports to assemble a picture, to understand a phenomenon, someone from the other side was using this picture as a map, was registering who gets too close to the corners of the thing, who pushes too hard against the boundaries. From that day forward, the morgue stopped being in my mind the end of the line, the final destination. It became a waiting room of a system much larger than I'd imagined. The place where a body enters with one tag and in some drawer we can't see, that exists in parallel dimensions, exits with another, forwarded, transferred, kept under observation according to rules we'll never fully understand. And it is impossible not to think that while living employees count children as footsteps and knocks on metal, while they try to make sense of impossible sounds. From the other side, someone is doing the same thing with us, listening to where our voice enters the conversation, noting who stops to hear these stories, marking what city they're from. What type of person is attracted to this subject? Who has the sensitivity or curse to perceive what others miss? And what if I told you that by listening to this story all the way through, by letting these words settle into your consciousness, you've already been noted somewhere in a ledger you'll never see, recorded by hands that no longer need Bodis to hold pens. The terror of cursed orphanages, haunted hospitals, and cold morgues loses its theatrical shine when you realize that in the end, oh, this is just work structure for something much simpler and much more frightening than any ghost story. The idea that there are people who died and didn't accept stopping, who refused to let death be an ending. People who transformed their own death into function, into purpose that continues. Children who never had family became receptionists of corridors between worlds. A nurse who lived on shift became the shift itself, eternal and unchanging. A morgue employee who talks to himself perhaps isn't as alone as he thinks, perhaps has company he can't quite see, but can feel. And who bridges all of this, who stitches together orphanage, hospital, morgue, and now your room, your bedroom, your bus ride home. It's precisely the invisible thread of the story itself, the narrative that connects scattered witnesses. Whether you like it or not, whether you believe or dismiss, from the moment you know that there are children who appear around hospital beds, that there's a nurse who continues filling out notebooks after death, that there are morgue drawers that respond to knocking with knocks of their own. You enter their listing, their registry, maybe as a curious listener who will forget by morning, maybe as someone frightened but more attentive now, who will watch shadows differently. Maybe, if you have very bad luck, if your line falls in the wrong place, as a probable future case, as someone who will one day need guidance across and in some thick notebook that doesn't belong to the hospital, doesn't belong to the police, doesn't belong to the morgue or any official institution. Someone may have just turned the page, wet the tip of their pen with careful deliberation, and written without hurry the phrase that would close this report in the most honest way possible, in the only way that respects what's really happening. Story concluded. Shift continues. Those who listened have been seen. Share in the comments your inner light with I illuminate ... Because in declaring what understanding you bring to these dark spaces, what clarity you offer to others who walk this same path of questioning and wondering, you become part of the network that spans both sides of the veil, that connects the living and those who continue working after life ends, that ensures nobody ever truly walks alone through the corridors that wait for us all eventually, when our names get called and it's time to see what comes after the last breath, the final heartbeat, the moment when one shift ends and another begins in places our maps do UNT show, but that exist as surely as the ground beneath our feet.